Hunter heard the words, "Fuck you, lady, just give me back my kid," echoing in his mind as consciousness returned. Pain followed, a blinding wave, along with the taste and smell of blood. He wondered if he had said that, and to whom. Lying on a wet stone floor with his hands beneath him, Hunter pressed down to push himself up, but his hands slipped in liquid, knocking him back and sending another bolt of pain through his skull. Opening his eyes to faint light, he saw the pool he lay in was blood. He hissed a curse and spat, worried it might be in his mouth, but realized he had bitten his own tongue. Carefully, he propped himself up on his elbows, trying to focus despite the nausea. Suddenly, he flinched onto his side at the sight of a corpse of a middle-aged man lying next to him, its vacant eyes staring back. Scrambling sideways like a frightened crab, he stopped when he bumped into a wooden table leg. He questioned whether he was on a job or had hit his head. His attention shifted to a strange dead bird draped across the man's back, its black feathery wings spread at crooked angles, but with a rat-like face and nearly as big as the man. Hunter concluded it must be fake, probably taxidermy or a haunted house prop, noting the realistic detail of its half-cut off head revealing bone and gristle. He had no time to gawk. The man beneath the bird was definitely dead. Hunter thought about escaping before Al found out, fearing the consequences if he were arrested. He groped around himself, noting something wrong with his body. Limbs and digits were all present but felt oddly sized or proportioned. Maybe he had hit his head harder than he thought. Grabbing the wooden leg of a chair, he began dragging himself to his feet. Though unsure of his location, he heard no sirens and assumed no one troublesome had noticed him yet. Then he remembered Al and realized there was no way he could be on a contract. He hadn't touched that kind of work for almost 15 years and had left that life after taking Al in. He wondered why he was lying next to a dead man. Clinging to the chair like a shipwrecked rat, he blinked away dizziness and examined the scene more carefully. The jagged, deep gash across the corpse's throat looked like a single strike, almost enough to decapitate the man, resembling an animal attack more than a human one. Hunter noted he hadn't made such a messy cut since he was a teenager and generally tried to avoid messy kills. Most striking was that the man had been killed atop a freaky satanic circle, and Hunter was sure he had never dealt with that kind of nonsense. Frowning, he pieced together the strange taxidermy, the occult circle, the dead man, and the black candle-lit room. It seemed some perverted wackos who believed in magic had created a huge mess, and Hunter had stumbled into it. Judging by his injuries, he had either been attacked or had slipped and fallen. He swore to beat the responsible party once he found them. Muttering fucking teenagers, Hunter blamed youth for the chaos, except for Al, who he considered a good kid. Searching his pockets for keys or a phone, he hoped to clean up the mess or call in a favor, but realized the dress he wore had no pockets. His hands explored the fabric, lots of it, decorated with frills and lace. Feeling upward caused more shock. He hauled himself to his feet, fighting pain and vertigo, and forced a look around the dimly lit room, which resembled something out of Dracula's castle. He identified the room as her secret workshop, but questioned whose workshop it was and how he knew that. Near a wall stood a heavy floor-length mirror. He staggered toward it, steadying himself with bloody hands on the glass. Squinting, he saw a young woman, at least 20 years younger than himself. He spoke aloud, questioning what was happening, and noticed the woman in the mirror seemed to speak when he did. Realizing this explained his strange bodily sensations, he concluded he was probably on drugs. He pulled on his face and hair, confirming the mind's conviction that this was his body. He wondered what he could have taken, mushrooms perhaps, the only substance that had caused such ego death before. He recalled the last time he took them, becoming convinced he was a caterpillar and spending weeks waking up rolled in blankets like a cocoon, suspecting he was still a bug. At least now he was hallucinating being human, which he optimistically counted as an improvement. He muttered that he could work with this, squishing his cheeks and watching the woman in the mirror do the same. His only concern was when and why he had taken mushrooms, another accident like the time he mistook a wink at a PDA bake sale for a drug brownie, or had he fallen off the wagon. He hoped not, knowing Maria would be furious if she found out, especially after 5 years of sobriety. Closing his eyes against a migraine, he wished for a high rather than psychedelics, as the headache felt like his brain was being slowly crushed. He sensed something behind the pain, something big waiting to burst if poked, so he pressed his thoughts further. Before arriving here, he had been somewhere strange and endless, but his memory of it was distorted. There had been a woman or something pretending to be one, and he had cursed at her extensively. He demanded to know where his child was. A voice replied that the child was dead, had moved on, and had already been reborn. He insisted she send him after the child. The voice asked if he was sure that was what he wanted. He affirmed with anger. The voice explained that it owed him one, and that when it came for his child, there had been a margin of error, and he had fallen into it. He asked if that meant she had killed them. She said she was only supposed to transfer them. He shouted in disbelief. She admitted she was new at this and apologized he cursed her, demanding she come down and face him, threatening violence. She snapped one of her many fingers, briefly silencing him. She offered to make it up to him by allowing him to be reborn as anyone he wanted, someone powerful, happy, important. He glowered silently, shaking with rage and uninterested in her offer. She sighed, mentioning that very few people got such an opportunity. She snapped again, restoring his ability to speak despite his anger. He forced himself to calm down, knowing she wasn't threatened by him and was likely his only chance to find Al. He said he didn't want any of that, he just wanted to find his son and protect him, asking if that was too much to ask. She said no but warned he wouldn't like how he'd have to do it. He vowed he'd manage. She cautioned him not to come crying when he regretted it. He cursed her and demanded she give him back his kid. Then he woke up in a pool of blood. He groaned, putting his head in his hands, questioning what kind of trip he was on, wondering if that woman had been God and why. God looked so freaky with so many eyes he questioned why he had believed her when she said Al was dead. His heart pounded with icy fear at the thought that something had happened to his kid. He hoped he was hallucinating or drugged somewhere, making a fool of himself, because if what the spider woman said was real and something had happened to Al, he didn't know how to deal with it. He pondered the meaning of her words, transfer, margin of error, wondering how they could have died and why he couldn't remember. He thought about Al's age and whether Al had been scared or hurt. He considered if it had been Hunter's fault. He began breathing too fast, feeling his fingertips tingle. He forced himself to get a hold, clenching and opening his fists, focusing on slowing his breathing, telling himself he had better things to do. If this was a hallucination, it would end and things would return to normal. If not, he needed to find his kid. Turning from the mirror, he assessed his problems, inhabiting a strange woman's body, a room covered in blood, and 2 corpses. He wanted to run from the room and yell at people until someone told him where Al was, but years of experience taught him that leaving a dead body unattended invited discovery by some hiker or Boy Scout. Also, he was still covered in blood, and people didn't like talking to those covered in blood. He squinted around the dim room and saw a large fireplace across from him. He recalled that the woman whose body he was in had disposed of bodies before, and the knowledge appeared suddenly, as if it had been there all along. He bent down to grab the bird, like creature, and shivered with horror as it felt very real. He poked it, searching for seams or stitching but found none, realizing he had a bona fide monster. He strained to pick up its cold, rigid body and lugged it toward the fireplace, comforting himself that it was already dead. Left the other corpse, he grabbed it under the arms, planted his feet, braced himself, and pulled with all his might, making pitiful progress. Moving a dead man was harder than it looked, and the woman's body he inhabited was weaker than his old one. He glowered at the pale, skinny arms, wondering if the woman was lazy or malnourished, and questioned why she had chosen to murder such a big man. He thought Simon couldn't have been her only option. She must have known tinier people. Wasn't his the woman had chosen Simon because he was violent, stupid, and greedy, with no friends, family, or stable job, so no one would miss him. She had instructed Simon to meet her only after closing and taught him secret passages to her office to avoid being seen. She promised higher pay than any other client as long as he didn't poke around, and he eagerly took more work until she called him to her office and strangled him unconscious with her tentacles. As she pulled him into her secret room, she felt no guilt, only disappointment that he hadn't been smarter, since a struggle would have been more entertaining. He snapped back to himself and fell onto his ass beside Simon. He pressed his hands against his skull, wincing and squeezing his eyes shut as the severe pain intensified, bringing nausea. He wondered if it was possible to hallucinate again while already hallucinating. The memory felt like those strange bits of knowledge he suddenly had, but more painful and unpleasant. More to the point, tentacles. She had tentacles. Was that how she usually carried things? He realized that explained why her arms were so weak. He wondered where the tentacles had come from. Suddenly, he knew. If he hadn't already been on the floor, he would have sat down, because this was the wackiest thing yet. He raised his hand and, from memory, cast a spell. Thick dark ropes rose from the floor, coiled around the corpse, and dragged it across the room into the fireplace. He lowered his hand, and the ropes vanished. He giggled. He wrapped his arms around his stomach and curled into a ball, laughing despite the pain. It was gross but fascinating. Momentarily forgetting his panic, he scrambled to his bare feet and ran to the fireplace. Looking around in his memories, he recalled another spell, raised both hands, and laughed again. Fire erupted from his fingertips, massive gouts of flame roaring toward the bodies piled on the grate and igniting them. Instantly the room filled with unbearable heat and light, but he laughed anyway, exclaiming that he was a wizard. He wasn't sure what was real or if he'd lost his mind, but the discovery that he had become a living flamethrower overshadowed everything else. He expected burning the corpses to take a long time, but the 2 bodies on the grate turned to to ash quickly. He wondered if the fire was more efficient because it was magic fire and questioned where this skill had been all his life. Cutting off the spell, he tore off his blood-soaked clothes and threw them into the remaining flames. Now he just had to deal with the blood. He considered whether the crazy lady had bleach, but then remembered there was a spell for that too. He laughed again, coughing as the smoke irritated him, and realized he needed to stop. This time, he focused more deliberately, thinking through the spell and visualizing its construction based on a magic circle, then channeling it through his hands. Watching his hands intently, he saw shadowy energy burst from his fingertips as the blood on his body and the floor began to disintegrate. Between the monster, the magic, and the memories, he was certain he had ended up somewhere else. That realization didn't upset him. Instead, he marveled at how easy magic made things. Now, with just a few seconds of concentration, he was done. The new development almost made up for his terrible headache. He rubbed his chin, noting that 2 problems were solved and that he now had to deal with something else. Looking down, he realized he was no longer covered in blood but was naked and still definitely a woman. Didn't know what to do about that and didn't like it. Trying to remember a helpful spell yielded nothing, so he decided to go forth like this, preferably with clothes on. Using magic, he tapped the wall, infused it with mana, and lit the place up. He opened a clothes cabinet on the opposite wall and grabbed a pair of pants and a shirt. Putting on the pants was easy, but the shirt only draped fabric over his chest, which he found disappointing. He had never had a chest like this before, and while it might be fine on someone else, he felt it was too conspicuous on him. The idea of wearing a bra made him twice as uncomfortable. Without a solution, he shrugged, grabbed a coat, and slipped it on. Looking into a floor-length mirror, he confirmed that he still didn't like how he looked but decided that if anyone bothered him, he would set them on fire with his mind. He could do that now. With immediate problems addressed, he rubbed his eyes and sighed. The longer he stayed, the harder it was to convince himself this was all in his head. There was no dreamy quality to things, just the brutal, linear passage of time. The pain felt real, the small inconveniences felt real, and so did his confusing memories of the endless place with the scary glowing spider lady. Leaning closer to the mirror, he inspected the injuries on his face, bruising on his jaw and a deep, swollen gash above his hairline trickling fresh blood. He was pretty sure he had identified the source of his migraine, but couldn't remember how he got like this. The corresponding memories were fuzzy and incomplete, but he recalled the lady standing when she ejected her soul and that her body must have hit the floor afterward. He reasoned that the sacrifice and magic circle had been so she could leave her body, but questioned if souls could live without bodies and where she might have gone. Dismissed it as her problem. Studying himself closer, he decided his new face wasn't too bad. Arched eyebrows, an aquiline nose, and lips neither thin nor thick, overall average except for freaky green veins running down the left side. Poking them, he found they were slightly raised and felt hard, almost root-like. The veins and this face felt familiar. He wondered where he had seen that before and was sure the skin problem hadn't existed in his old world. The name Ianthe also felt familiar. He wasn't sure if he knew her or if he just inherited some jumbled memories from her. Another striking feature was how colorful his new body was. His hair, tangled in a rat's nest but almost reaching mid-back, was bright crimson red, matching his eyelashes. His eyes were strange too. The right was a deep reddish pink, but the left had a black scara contrasted by a vivid green iris that looked like it was glowing. He thought magic might explain all the weird things he had seen so far. As he stared into that eye, unease crept over him. Something about it raised the hairs on the back of his neck, as if the eye wasn't truly his, as if he was looking at something or someone else and it was looking back. Slapped his hand over that eye and jumped back from the mirror. He told himself it was probably just his imagination and not a curse. He wondered if he didn't already have enough bullshit to deal with. He attempted to probe her memories further to uncover what she knew about the eye, but suddenly lacked the desire to confront this new problem. The abundance of eye patches in her clothes cabinet now made sense, and he understood her wish to conceal the unsettling eye. He took one of the patches, slipped it on, and glanced back at the mirror, finally recalling where he had seen her before. About a month or two ago, near the end of winter, the little ranch he shared with Al in Maricopa still had fairy lights and Hanukkah decorations up. Al had been too lazy to take them down, and Hunter hadn't had the heart to do it himself after seeing how hard Al had worked to put them up. They had gathered in the living room, the only room with a TV. According to Al, this was because Hunter was a tyrannical Luddite who hated televisions, but the real reason was that Hunter knew if he let a teenager stash all their electronics in their room, he would rarely see them again, so if Al wanted to play his Switch on a big screen, he had to do it where his dad could join him. Hunter allowed Al to believe many misconceptions, that Hunter liked video games but was terrible at them. Hunter had convinced Al of this by being so bad at every game Al purchased that Al hid the cons. However, Hunter kept buying more, and Al took pity on him, playing games on the big TV, so Hunter Hunter could enjoy them. Without touching the controller, this only cost Hunter some pride and a years-long losing streak in Super Smash Bros. Since Al challenged him every time Hunter annoyed him, this arrangement made video games a safe topic between them, something they both needed because now that Al was a teenager, even trivial interactions could spark fights. Al, curled up on the love seat wrapped in an oversized black hoodie, held a joy con in each hand and absently chewed on strands of his long dark hair. Though his posture seemed casual, Hunter sensed tension radiating from him. Al replied he was playing something new that Hunter probably wouldn't like. Hunter pulled back with a joke, lamenting that nobody could replace the little squid kids in his heart and that he couldn't believe Al was abandoning his fish babies. Al snorted. Al named the game Rabbit Heart and described the TV screen showing 5 college-age kids with colorful hair, and behind them a red-haired woman with an eye patch and green veins on half her face, looming. Like a monster, he explained it was like a novel you play through, going through storylines based on characters you befriend, something someone on Twitter had recommended. Hunter's eyes narrowed with suspicion. He was more pop culture savvy and perceptive than Al thought and sensed Al was hiding something. Hunter teased that there must be smooching in it, which made Al bristle and glare, saying he'd play it in his room. Hunter stopped him, expressing interest and claiming he liked romance and the more kissing the better. Al gave him a look of disgust and begged him never to say that again. Hunter insisted he was serious and reminded Al that he owed him after the Zelda game with the blonde kids. Al corrected him, calling it Breath of the Wild. Hunter got fired up, complaining about waiting 100 years for the little twink and no kiss at the end, threatening to email Nintendo if they didn't date in the sequel. Al begged him to stop contacting them. Hunter put away his phone and shifted gears, asking what the game was about. Al admitted you fight evil and make friends at a magic school. It was technically a romance game but had more to it. Hunter shrugged and said it sounded fun. Al asked if he was serious, and Hunter assured him, waving him to play it and promising to keep the teasing to a minimum. Al muttered that Hunter was lying but calmed down, and Hunter caught a small, reluctant smile and a look of relief from him. Hunter knew that every once in a while, with things like the nail polish, the long hair, and now this game, Al revealed parts of himself, testing whether Hunter would accept them. Hunter sensed something Al was hiding, afraid to bring it up, lurking just beneath the surface between them. The longer Al hid it, the more worried Hunter became. He remembered the game, even if he couldn't recall how he died. He also remembered that just before his death, things between him and Al had been deteriorating. Now, standing before a mirror in this new world, he looked at himself and spat the word coward. He asked himself why he had let so much go unsaid, why he hadn't told Al that he would love him no matter what he was, hiding that all he wanted was for Al to be happy and safe, regardless of anyone else. He had been too afraid he was wrong and would offend Al, sparking a huge fight, afraid he was right and would push Al into revealing something before he was ready, afraid of big emotions and saying something hurtful by accident. He had thought they had time, believing that by showing Al it was alright, eventually Al would come around on his own. Hunter found himself in another world, inhabiting the body of a fictional woman and staring at a mirror, tears streaming down his face because his son was missing. He muttered a harsh insult to himself, pressing his forehead against the cold glass. After taking a deep breath, he straightened up and wiped his face with his sleeve, determined not to waste this second chance. He resolved to find his son and make sure Al knew just how much Hunter cared about him. Then, they would have a serious discussion about how they had ended up in a video game. Hunter kicked the door of the secret room open, partly out of frustration at the lack of a handle and partly for the dramatic effect of starting a mission by kicking something. Immediately, he doubled over in pain, clutching his head, regretting the action given his severe migraine. Using the wall for support, he looked up and saw he had entered a posh office with gray stone walls and floor. Now covered by thick carpets in rich reds and purples, the room was warmly lit by yellow mage lights from the walls and ceiling. A heavy wooden desk sat before a row of windows showing distant lights in the darkness. Beyond the desk was a sitting area with couches and chairs, and one wall was entirely covered in floor, 2 ceiling bookshelves with a rolling ladder affixed to them. As he stepped further into the room, Hunter passed a decorative plinth holding a sundial. Curious, he picked it up and was shocked by its cost, nearly dropping it. Cursed quietly at the extravagance, realizing the entire room was filled with similarly expensive antiques. He concluded the woman whose body he now inhabited was extraordinarily wealthy, wealth beyond anything he had ever known, even at the height of his contracting career. The thought struck him, if this belonged to Ianthe, and he was now in her body, then he was now incredibly rich. Feeling lightheaded, Hunter moved unsteadily toward the large leather chair and sank into it. He had never stolen a body before, at least not to live in one, but he felt entitled under the principle of finders keepers, especially since the memories he inherited suggested Ianthe had not told anyone she planned to abandon her body effectively. She was dead, and no one but him knew it. He drummed his fingers on the armrest, considering his options. Revealing his true identity to anyone except his son was out of the question. If any coworker had claimed to be a soul from another world sent by a spider goddess, Hunter would have taken them to a hospital. Yet acting like his old self in this new body would surely raise suspicion. People's personalities did not change drastically overnight, and the excuse of being scared straight by ghosts would not be credible. He realized he would have to pretend to be Ianthe, especially if he wanted access to her bank account. He sighed unhappily and massaged his aching head. Though he was accustomed to acting in his old line of work, usually pretending to be qualified, friendly, or harmless for short periods, living as another person was a different matter entirely. He doubted he could sustain such an act long term. From what he knew, Ianthe seemed cold, introverted, and unapproachable, quite unlike Hunter, who had spent most of his life as the friendly guy everyone liked. The thought of alienating others on purpose made him nervous. He also suspected he might inherit her enemies along with her wealth. When he tried to think of who they might be, a wave of cold swept over him. Worsening his headache, he set that thought aside and focused on the immediate need to find a private place to recover. His body felt weak, and he was both shivering and sweating, signs that it was more than just a bump on the head. Ianthe's apartment was nearby, and since it was still dark, he could probably reach it unseen. That was fortunate, as encountering someone who knew her could expose him. Suddenly, the sound of a key sliding into the office door lock broke the silence, followed by the metallic clatter of someone trying the handle. Hunter shouted for them to wait, and the noises ceased. He wondered who it could be at such an early hour on a Saturday. A soft, worried female voice called out, asking if my lady was inside and if she was all right. Hunter recognized the voice and felt his headache intensify as memories pressed on his mind. He struggled to suppress the urge to think further and mentally pushed the information away. He called back that he was fine and asked for a moment, hoping to silence her. He wasn't ready to face anyone yet and needed to find a way to get rid of the woman before she noticed something was wrong. Wincing against the pain and dizziness, he touched his head wound, feeling it sticky and bleeding again. His gaze shifted to the tall bookshelves and the ladder nearby. Abandoning the idea of method acting, he decided on a better plan. Hunter moved to the door, pressed his hands against the cool wood, and took a deep breath to steady himself. Then, he opened it to reveal a frantic woman standing there. She was short and stocky, in her mid-40s, with pale skin covered in light orange freckles, coral hair pulled into a bun, and wide yellow-green eyes. Filled with shock, she addressed him as my lady, horrified by his appearance, and asked if he was all right. Hunter struggled to speak, but the sight of the woman's face triggered memories he had been trying to suppress. When Ianthe was 10, Anemone had been assigned as her lady's maid. Practical and loving toward children, Anemone treated Ianthe like a normal child despite her circumstances. For 3 years, she became the only source of kindness, patience, and consistency in Ianthe's life, and a genuine fondness developed between them. The duchy was dangerous. Ianthe could protect Anemone from forest monsters and servant politics, but was forbidden from harming her father's guests. If no physical wound was visible or provable, had harm occurred? She experimented. A week later, when the guest threw himself from the castle ramparts, his body scratched raw and his head bald and scabbed from hair. Pulling, Ianthe waited below at the ravine. She had never touched him. She didn't have to. Loopholes she discovered were valuable. She used them to keep Anemone safe ever since back in the present. Hunter found himself leaning against Anemone, who gripped his shoulders. She urged him to wake up. Shaking him gently, he warned her that shaking him again would make him vomit. She apologized, noting he had fallen, and tentatively reached for the gash on his head, which still seeped blood, despite his earlier efforts to dissolve it. She asked what had happened. Hunter lied, saying he had fallen off a ladder and thought he had knocked himself unconscious. Anemone asked how long he had been out. He learned it was Saturday, and they had last spoken 3 days ago. Anemone whispered that it was all her fault. Hunter realized Ianthe had been missing that long and, given her injuries, was lucky to be alive. He struggled to keep track of reality as memories about Anemone and the world flooded back. He recalled that Anemone of Electus, a commoner without a last name, had been a maid but was now the head secretary of the university's upper administration. Ianthe had not told Anemone she planned to leave her body, but had mentioned performing a complicated spell in her secret room, suggesting Anemone was checking on her after losing contact. Hunter found it unsettling that Ianthe likely expected Anemone to find her body. Anemone asked to see his eyes and if he felt dizzy. She grabbed his face with one hand and summoned a bright light with the other. The light caused him intense pain, making him squeeze his eyes shut and struggle to pull away, but he was too weak to break her hold. The light went out, and as he opened his eyes, Anemone pressed a cold hand to his forehead, noting he was burning up and insisting he go to the infirmary. Hunter protested, wanting to sleep it off, but Anemone refused. She lifted him into her arms despite his protests, explaining he had a concussion, a fever, and had been alone too long. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she carried him away. Hunter tried to calm her, assuring her it was not that bad, and promised not to fire her afterward. Still, he had no choice and closed his eyes when he opened them. He was lying on his back in a different place. Above him stood Anemone and another person he recognized. It was past midnight, and the infirmary was deserted except for the three of them. The woman lay calm and motionless despite her pain. Healer Chiron sat beside her, his fingers glowing with golden light as he methodically healed her injuries. Chiron murmured that he would not ask how she kept getting so many internal lesions, but warned she needed to stop or risk bleeding out and dying unnoticed. She grunted in affirmation but offered no thanks or explanation. If she ever revealed the truth behind her injuries, Chiron would likely try to kill her on the spot, a thought that made her smile. She insisted she would not die easily. Chiron replied he would be sure to inscribe that on her grave. The stern-faced, thickly built man looking down at Hunter had jade-green eyes and smooth dark brown skin. His long hair was pulled into hundreds of twists tied back with a silver ribbon, dark mulberry at the roots brightening to light pink at the tips. Anemone stood next to Chiron, her bright coral hair and chartreuse eyes striking against the room's muted tones. Hunter, still dazed and in pain, remarked aloud that everyone there looked so pretty. The hand near his forehead paused. Hunter added that they looked like fairies. Chiron frowned, then told Anemone she needed to prepare herself because brain damage was a real possibility. Anemone covered her mouth, sniffled, and turned away. Hunter opened his mouth to say something comforting, but a golden light bloomed from the fingertips touching his forehead, and the intense pain in his head melted away. Only then did he realize the rest of his body was hurting too. Chiron continued speaking to Anemone, noting it was impressive she was alive at all since such an injury, left untreated for days, should have been fatal. Anemone's quiet sniffling turned to sobbing as she covered her face. Hunter told Chiron he loved him but suggested he needed to work on his bedside manner. Chiron responded with a frown and moved to check a bracelet someone had placed on Hunter's right wrist. He warned Hunter about severe cranial swelling, a high fever, and recurring lesions, explaining the danger of brain. Chiron paused, then relocated the bracelet to Hunter's ankle before continuing. He asked if Hunter had difficulty forming words. Hunter hesitated, then admitted yes, though he couldn't explain the sudden New York/New Jersey accent in the Sidonian language he was unknowingly speaking. Chiron noted that if speech was affected, writing ability might be too. Hunter considered the Sidonian alphabet but stopped himself when he tried to get up, as Chiron used his glowing hand to push him back down. Chiron nodded and turned back to Anemone, saying she would live for now but warning of seizures, motor control issues, memory impairment, and behavioral changes, adding that they were already seeing the last one. Chiron said he would run tests to determine the extent of Anemone's issues but admitted brain damage was something he could not fix. Anemone asked if there was really no way to heal such damage. Chiron explained he could regrow neurons but not replicate their old pathways, so some losses were permanent, though therapy might help. Anemone's face twisted again, and Hunter reached out to touch her wrist. Surprised, she looked at him. Hunter told her not to cry because he still had all the important things. Anemone insisted it was not fine, blaming herself for letting Hunter send her away and for not checking on him sooner. Hunter winced at the thought and resolved that if he ever encountered Ianthe's soul, he would reprimand her for leaving Anemone to find her dead body. Chiron suggested keeping her overnight to monitor for sudden death. Anemone's face twisted again, and Hunter warned Chiron he was going to make her dehydrated. Chiron frowned and told Anemone to drink water and bring some for Hunter, along with food. Anemone straightened, wiped her face with a handkerchief, and said she would get something from the canteen, then hurried off. Leaving Chiron and Hunter alone, Chiron's calm expression darkened, and he glared at Hunter, demanding to know what trouble he had gotten into this time. Hunter hesitated, but Chiron said he did not care and told Hunter to figure out how to stay alive because if he died, Chiron would be forced to sit on the search committee to replace him, which he did not have time for. Hunter realized the body he inhabited came with a job. Chiron hissed at him, saying he was not his dog, and warned Hunter not to call for him again unless he wanted Chiron to watch him die. Hunter tried to keep his face neutral while thinking he had known Ianthe had many enemies. Now that the pain was gone, Hunter could access her memories more easily and quickly reviewed what she knew about Chiron. Ianthe had been the president of Aegis University, so Hunter was now the president. The man he was speaking to was his employee, a high-ranking one at that. Arch-healer Chiron was the dean of the healing college, overseeing all staff and faculty at the on-campus college, the campus infirmary, and the off-campus teaching hospital in Castry. He managed courses, professors, recruitment of students and investors, and research projects. He was also a minor celebrity in Cydonia, renowned for his skill and revolutionary research, considered a genius on par with. The Saint Anemone must have called Chiron on Hunter's behalf, which meant Hunter had insisted on being treated only by the Nobel Prize-winning executive, forcing Chiron to appear just to apply a simple band-aid. No wonder Chiron looked so pissed. Hunter apologized for the inconvenience, hoping his expression conveyed sincerity, but Chiron's disapproving gaze suggested otherwise. Hunter attempted to express gratitude, though Chiron appeared indifferent, his look more like one of wanting to slap him. Hunter then proposed discussing an increase to the healing college's budget. After the test, Chiron narrowed his pale green eyes, recalling a similar discussion last year that Hunter had rejected. Hunter awkwardly tried to retract his previous rejection. Admitting short-sightedness, Chiron remained silent, thoughtful. Hunter requested an emergency expenditure for the current semester's staffing shortage and a permanent budget increase for the next year. Chiron accepted the deal, grumbling that brain damage could be an improvement in some people, but he did not leave. He smiled, revealing slightly pointed canine teeth, and said he looked forward to discovering what Hunter had done to himself. The tests were neither long nor physically difficult but emotionally uncomfortable, as Chiron openly despised Hunter and made no effort to hide it. Throughout the day, Hunter's recurring fever and migraine forced him to repeatedly seek help from lay healers who refused to act, instead fetching Chiron, who arrived radiating loathing. By sunset, Hunter felt this was only the beginning of encounters with people who hated Ianthe, which did not inspire confidence. Despite this, Hunter survived, likely thanks to Anemone, who had prevented him from sneaking off to Ianthe's apartment to die quietly of brain swelling. He resolved to find a way to repay her. His plan to attribute his condition to a head wound worked well. Physically, he functioned normally, but Chiron's tests revealed other issues. For example, when Chiron tried to get him to speak with an Ionian accent, the common dialect of Cydonia, Hunter instead spoke Cydonian with various American accents. His habits prevailed where Ianthe's knowledge clashed with his own. He could write in Cydonian but only in his own illegible handwriting, prompting Chiron to offer exercise books to relearn legible writing, which Hunter politely declined, knowing his Latin script was just as poor. Hunter considered his habits prevailing a positive sign, as it meant his new brain was still his own. Chiron had also helped test the scope of Ianthe's memories. Hunter acquired physical skills, general knowledge, magic, use, and language fluency, along with details about Ianthe's job and colleagues. However, he lacked knowledge of the current emperor and the full pantheon of Cydonian gods. He was not overly upset by these gaps, as the ability to communicate, recognize people, and perform magic was a significant advantage for someone unfamiliar with this world. Chiron diagnosed him with post-traumatic retrograde amnesia, which Hunter found ironic since he remembered his life perfectly. Hunter realized a difference between memories already downloaded into his mind and those not yet accessible. Accessing known memories caused no issues, but attempting to recall unknown or emotionally charged personal experiences triggered his fever and migraine. He convinced Anemone to bring a staff roster to provoke flashbacks and practice resisting them. While Ianthe's memories were useful, each recalled memory shifted from belonging her to belonging to Hunter, creating a disturbing sensation. He worried that prolonged exposure might merge their identities into someone new, which he vehemently rejected. Though he disliked himself, he did not want to become someone else. This was not a subject he could discuss with Chiron, but Hunter suspected that transferring 52 years of his mind into a 36-year-old woman's brain had not gone smoothly. He wondered if the spider goddess responsible accepted feedback on her work. Now, lying in the semi-darkness of the empty infirmary, Hunter waved his hand rapidly in front of his face, musing that either the FPS here was incredible or this was an indistinguishable simulation. He had hoped this world was a video game, imagining the novelty but no helpful user interface, floating healing numbers, or NPC-like behavior had appeared. As far as he could tell, this place was as real as his previous world, only with magic and gods, or beings claiming divinity, whose existence was universally acknowledged because magic depended on them. He still could not get over that. More importantly, importantly, if gods were real, why hadn't he taken him instead? He had never been particularly devout, and had even flirted with atheism, but he had expected death to follow some familiar pattern. He might have accepted being taken by another earth religion, if only to finally know who was right and move on. Instead, he had encountered an ineffable spider lady, an experience that felt more like an alien abduction than a metaphysical event. On that uncomfortable note, he took a deep breath and looked outside the infirmary window. The night sky was clear and filled with a brilliant field of stars, the kind he had only seen far from civilization. Yet, he did not recognize a single constellation. This planet was not Earth. The fact that it was another planet made him feel a profound loneliness, as everything from his old life, even the ground and sky, was gone. He curled up into a ball, his eyes stinging as homesickness overwhelmed him. He thought of Maria and Joseph, Ael's friends, and the other parents he had known. Everyone was gone, and there was nothing he could do. He wondered how he was supposed to feel, knowing everyone else was still alive but unreachable. He missed them and hoped they were okay, wishing he could tell them he was going to find Al and protect him, but he could not. He resolved to focus on finding Al, though he was uncertain how to proceed. The goddess had promised to grant his wish to find and protect Al, so presumably ending up in this body would lead to that. However, since the goddess seemed responsible for their predicament, he took her promise with skepticism. Between Ianthe's fragmented memories and what he recalled from the video game, he was fairly certain the goddess was called the Dread Lady, Sidonia's goddess of rebirth. She was the head god and considered relatively benevolent despite her ominous title. In the game Rabbit Heart, she had been the primary god behind the protagonists, whose main plot involved fighting against antagonists, and their evil god on her behalf. Now, he realized he was one of those antagonists. Though much of Ianthe's memories were missing, he knew he had inherited her university job and her cult membership. Cult, called the Order of the King Undying, worshipped the King Undying by being violent toward outsiders if the world and characters matched the game. Then so did the story. The realization hit him hard, had he seen. Sitting up in bed, Ianthe's long hair fell into his face. As he rubbed it vigorously, it seemed impossible that so many coincidences could align naturally. Even if infinite futures existed, how could one be written, illustrated, coded, and developed into a game in his old world? Shiver ran up his spine as he bit his thumbnail, thinking the Dread Lady must have known he lacked the energy to act like Ianthe, and that the futures depicted in the game would change once he arrived. He muttered that it was a conspiracy, then cautioned himself not to jump to conclusions. Best case, this world was eerily similar to a video game by coincidence, unrelated to the plot. Worst case, he was caught in a millennia-long religious war as a villain, and he had not paid enough attention to the game. Were too many endings, too much dialogue, and countless side characters to keep track of. He had no idea when the game's story began, having ignored the dull historical introduction. He knew the story centered on a pink-haired girl, so he decided to watch for her. As long as she had not appeared, he thought he still had time to escape. If the game showed the future, he would not stick around for the chaos ahead. If the Dread Lady wanted Ianthe gone, he was willing to oblige. He planned to grab Al, raid Ianthe's bank account, and flee to a distant country. Chiron had asked him to stay in the infirmary for a few days, but he could not wait. As long as he was not dying, fever or no fever, he needed to start searching. He had arrived in Ianthe's body at the end of move-in week, so the last students would arrive tomorrow and classes would begin the day after. His biggest problem was that he looked different in this world, meaning Al likely did too. He would have to play a soul-searching version of Where's Waldo among the entire university staff and student body. According to Ianthe's knowledge, Hunter faced the daunting task of searching through around 2,000 students and a few hundred staff and faculty. Despite the overwhelming numbers, he reminded himself that thanks to Anemone, Chiron, and the infirmary staff, several suspects were already eliminated. Resolved to be patient and prepared to search the entire country if necessary. The next morning, Hunter woke feeling significantly better. No headache, nausea, or dizziness. He hoped the fever would not return, as he was determined to leave the country regardless of his condition. Healer Chiron arrived at dawn to check on him, appearing tired but calmer than before. He explained that Hunter's temperature was now normal for most people, though Hunter generally ran colder. Chiron advised him to stay another day or more, warning that the fever might return and that some injuries could be complex, with symptoms potentially resurfacing later. Despite Hunter's protests that he felt fine and wanted to leave, Chiron insisted that his body needed rest. Recognizing their mutual reluctance to keep Hunter confined, Chiron produced 2 small bottles of medicine, a green one for pain and a red one for fever, and instructed Hunter to take no more than 3 daily doses and to return if he needed them. Hunter refrained from calling Chiron Doc in English, language, aware that mixing languages invited unwanted questioning. Chiron's annoyance was less intense than the previous day. Shortly after, Anemone arrived carrying a change of clothes and breakfast, her expression on the verge of tears. Hunter sent them both out to change, feeling a pang of guilt over Ianthe's history of mistreatment toward them despite their willingness to help when needed. While rifling through the clothes, Hunter found a bra and set it aside before searching the room's cabinets for a solution to his chest discomfort. He considered warning Anemone and Chiron about potential dangers but doubted they would believe him, especially given the complicated situation and uncertainty about the game's plot unfolding. He resolved to leave them a note before departing. Finding a roll of bandages, Hunter recalled the story of Mulan and wrapped his chest accordingly, despite the complexity of his current identity as a man pretending to be a woman pretending to be a man. He wondered if the disappearance of Ianthe's breasts would appear suspicious to acquaintances. Dressing in the loose white blouse and long black coat Anemone provided, he stuffed the bra into his pocket to discard later. Lingering by the door, he overheard Chiron telling Anemone that he could not physically stop Ianthe from leaving and that although she was unwell, it was normal for her. Chiron reiterated his advice for her to return if symptoms reappeared. Hunter pocketed the 2 vials of medicine, determined not to return unless absolutely necessary, as one day under Chiron's scrutiny was more than enough. Eating the bread, like food Anemone brought, Hunter found it surprisingly good, fluffy, slightly salty, with hints of olive oil and rosemary. He noted that the food in this new world tended to be good and, combined with magic, thought living here might not be so bad. Anemone also brought a warm mug, but Hunter frowned upon seeing it was tea again. He missed coffee and had learned it was no longer available, though its existence in this world gave him hope of finding some later. Anemone's raised voice came through the door, expressing concern over potential complications since Ianthe had nearly died. Chiron responded that was why he advised staying a few days but emphasized that, aside from brain damage, she was still Ianthe and could not be forced to stay. Anemone sighed, admitting she would rather herd cats than try to control her, to which Chiron replied that she would be less likely to get scratched. Hunter paused before the small mirror on the wall to fix his appearance. Though it was strange to see the wrong face looking back, it appeared less haggard that morning. He found a small comfort in recognizing that her nose resembled his old pre-surgery nose, a feature he had missed despite the reasons for losing it. He straightened his clothing with military precision but struggled with his hair, which was a tangled mess. Anemone had brought toiletries, including a hairbrush, dental supplies, and deodorant, but no amount of brushing could disguise the dull, oily condition of Ianthe's waist. Length hair after 4 days unwashed attempting a cleaning cantrip, Hunter found his hair became dry and straw-like, and his skin felt parched. Spell improved cleanliness slightly but was far from ideal. He had learned to braid Ael's hair for marching band, so he managed to wrangle his own into a French braid that was only slightly ugly, almost justifying the hours spent enduring the tortured sounds of dying geese from his kid's trumpet practice. He slipped on the eye patch, covering the weird left eye he'd inherited. He realized he really needed to look into the curse but decided to worry about it after finding his son. He liked the eye patch, it gave him Bond villain vibes, making him imagine investing in a pool of sharks to throw someone in, though he'd never killed anyone that way before. He thought about Ianthe's money and the possibilities but forced himself to stay focused outside. Anemone spoke in a lowered voice, noting that Ianthe seemed nicer than usual. Chiron agreed it was uncomfortable, and Anemone admitted it made her nervous, as if Ianthe was setting them up for something. Hunter thought he couldn't even be nice in this body without raising suspicion. Chiron reminded Hunter that he had warned them Ianthe might be different now and suggested they thank the gods for small gifts and move on. Hunter stepped out of his infirmary room, revealing he had been listening, and said the semester started tomorrow and they couldn't afford distractions. Anemone's face turned bright red, while Chiron's calm expression hinted he was ready to say worse to Hunter's face. Anemone stammered, addressing Hunter as my lady, but Hunter corrected her to president, trying to reassure her with a smile. Anemone's face paled, and Hunter wondered how Ianthe had been treating her. Anemone hesitated, asking Hunter to reconsider staying longer, but he declined, saying he had laid around long enough. He reflected on how the confident super-woman who had rescued him seemed to have lost her self-esteem now that he was doing better. He wanted to tell her to find a better boss but feared she'd think he was firing her. Chiron recommended Hunter stay a little longer, but Hunter insisted he would be fine. Chiron then offered a folio, which Hunter took and flipped open. He acknowledged the emergency expenditure and planned to read and sign it that day, asking Anemone to take it to accounting tomorrow. Anemone offered to take it today, but Hunter reminded her it was Sunday and her day off, warning her never to work for free and that anyone telling her otherwise was trying to scam her. Anemone froze under Hunter's hand and opened her mouth, as if to say that Ianthe had always expected her to work on her day off, but then nodded instead. Hunter said he would leave the portfolio on her desk and send messages to the board, telling them he needed them to meet early. Anemone quavered that their meeting wasn't scheduled until next week, but Hunter commanded to move it to Tuesday. He admitted he didn't like being Ianthe but enjoyed being the president and saw no reason not to bully those holding Aegis purse strings on Chiron's behalf. Anemone asked if they could do that, and Hunter said yes, reminding her he had dirt on all of them and that if they pushed back, she should tell them he would come see them in person. Chiron muttered to himself that waiting a few days wouldn't be too bad and that his people could probably cover things. Hunter, thinking Chiron meant surviving without extra healers on staff, told him to start looking for people to fill the positions and not to worry about money, as he would get it. Chiron thanked him, conflicted, and Hunter smiled. Grateful that Chiron had saved his skin yesterday, he waved and said he had to run, telling them to take care of themselves. Anemone and Chiron stared at him but made no move to stop him, so he grabbed the door handle and bolted out. The hall he emerged into was cool and empty. Letting out a breath of relief, he rushed off in a walk that was almost a run even if they were nice. Being around people who knew the actual Ianthe was nerve-wracking. Keeping what was hers and what was his straight in his head while talking to them was a huge pain. Now that he had some time to himself, he could start looking through the students and staff and maybe figure out a more methodical way to find out. He had a good memory for faces, but remembering thousands of people was asking a lot. He thought there might be some kind of online directory, pictures he could look at. He reached into his pocket to grab his phone but didn't find it. Unconsciously checking his other pockets, arriving at the back stairs of the building, he suddenly stopped. This world had no computers, internet, smartphones, or cameras. He cursed himself for only just realizing that that meant no more words with friends either. He wondered if Sidonia had Scrabble, hoping they had, at least that he couldn't find any information about board games in Ianthe's memory, but she was boring and anti-social and might never have bothered to play any. He headed down a long, narrow stairwell with stone steps worn from hundreds of years of student use, trying to shrug off the revelation. From his perspective, computers, smartphones, and the internet were relatively new inventions, and he could survive without them. Still, he admitted to himself that they were useful and fun, and now he was cut off from them forever. Pausing at the bottom of the empty stairwell, he leaned against the wall and held a moment of silence for the 21st century technology he'd been forced to leave behind. Then he straightened up, pressed open the exit doors, and stepped out into the morning sun. The bright light dazzled him briefly, but once his eyes recovered, he looked around at a pretty stone path surrounded by lush trees. Late summer flowers were in their last blooms before fall, and the air smelled clean and fresh through the trees. He glimpsed more buildings in the distance. He turned around and walked backwards to get a better look at the building he had emerged from. The structure was undeniably old, its quiet majesty evident in the subtle wear and the patches of newer stone added over generations. It reminded him of European buildings he had seen, where stepping through certain doors led into rooms built 1,000 years ago, a sensation that made him feel small in a comforting way. Turning back, he followed the path until it opened onto a wide grassy expanse, then walked toward what appeared to be the main road through campus. Aegis was a university on the windward side of a mountain, and from his vantage point, he could see the island of Christ sprawling below. In the distance, he made out the port of Castri, the island's only city, with the blue-green sea sparkling beyond it. He noted the stronger breeze in the more open area, which tossed green butterflies and swept strands of his hair across his face. The air was cool, the sunlight warm but gentle. He briefly wished he could listen to Jimmy Buffet while lying by a pool, but quickly remembered that neither the music nor players existed in this world. Observing the carriages lining the main road, he narrowed his eyes, initially assuming the technology here would be medieval. He realized that while some carriages were horse-drawn, others were pulled by monsters or constructs, and a few appeared to move without any visible means of propulsion. Despite the presence of horses, there was no smell of manure, which he suspected was due to some magical intervention. As he walked past arriving students, their attendants, and university staff, he studied their faces. Some were familiar to Ianthe, but she did not make friends easily, so most offered only nervous nods or ignored him. Entirely, he suspected many had heard of Ianthe, the red-haired lady with the eye patch, and knew to avoid her. He noticed crests on certain carriages and uniforms, recognizing them as symbols of noble families. Ianthe's knowledge of politics and history was incomplete. He understood that the emperor claimed a divine right to rule, receiving a blessing from the Dread Lady, which he could bestow as noble titles. The general consensus among Sidonians was that nobility meant being holier and superior to common folk, chosen by the gods and blessed as a better breed of humans. Hunter rejected this ideology, having experienced similar beliefs before and knowing they rarely led anywhere good. He realized with discomfort that the body he now possessed belonged to one of these nobles, but was uncertain what that entailed. He hoped he did not have more employees under him in the game. Ianthe had been called President Ianthe or Young Duchess Ianthe, the latter implying she had not yet inherited the title from her father, Duke Ixion. Suddenly, a loud noise grew louder as he descended deeper into the castle. Ianthe had always wondered about its source, and now, standing before a dim red pool, she understood. She was not squeamish but could not bear to look directly at the pool, where living people floated in a horrifying state. Though she had not resented Morpheus for the curse, they repeatedly apologized as her father turned away from the pool holding a cup of the red liquid. He suddenly lost his balance and stumbled. Someone grabbed his arm to steady him, and he intended to thank them once he could speak without nausea grimacing. He pressed a hand to his pounding head, surprised by the sudden pain despite avoiding new memories. A gentle, melodic voice suggested deep breaths while still holding his arm, perhaps worried he would fall again. He took slow breaths and gradually regained his composure when he turned. He suddenly shouted in surprise. A tall man with golden eyes and a white smile, holding his arm, greeted him as president and asked if he was all right. Hunter recognized him from both Ianthe's memories and the game as Professor Ifis. This was the first person from Rabbit Heart he had encountered aside from the body he possessed, and he felt somewhat starstruck. Ifis looked down at him, amused, with dappled sunlight highlighting his golden, brown skin and wavy dark blue hair, giving him a vibrant, summery appearance. Hunter imagined Ifis might suddenly produce a volleyball and invite him to play. Hunter stammered that he was fine and tried to pull back his arm, but Ifis did not release it. After tugging harder a second time, Ifis let go, causing Hunter to stumble back. He caught his balance and rubbed the spot where Ifis had held him, realizing the grip had been strong enough to likely leave bruises. He wondered if that had been intentional. Hunter studied Ifis and acknowledged the warm expression and relaxed body language that suggested a golden retriever-like friendliness, but he noticed a hidden intensity in Ifis' gaze that didn't match the rest of him. The subtle but off look reminded Hunter of someone from his past who had looked at him similarly, a warning sign he had ignored for years with disastrous results. A chill passed over Hunter, making the hairs on his body stand up. He wanted to run away from that kind of look, but forced himself to keep a neutral expression. He reminded himself that he hadn't seen that man in nearly 14 years, and that person was long gone, whoever Ifis was. The intensity in his eyes had nothing to do with Hunter's old life. Hunter thought Ifis was lying but said aloud, "Sure, thanks for your help." Ifis admitted surprise at seeing Hunter out and about, addressing him as president and mentioning he had heard about Hunter's accident. Hunter frowned, realizing that word traveled fast here. He said he was fine now while trying to recall what he knew about Ifis from the game. According to Rabbit Heart, Ifis was a proud member of Team Protagonist who often acted as a mentor to the main characters. Though players were not required to listen to him, relying on his advice generally led to good endings. Unlike many adults in the game who were patronizing toward children, Ifis treated everyone with respect regardless of age, social status, or wealth. His sense of humor and respectful nature had made him Hunter's favorite character, which made the underlying hostility Hunter sensed all the more uncomfortable. Ifis propped his elbow on one hand and leaned his cheek against his fist, performing concern as he asked if Hunter was really fine, warning that head injuries could be dangerous long after the fact. Hunter recognized the insincerity in Ifis' behavior and was about to tell him to shove his fake concern when he remembered that he had only met 3 people since arriving, and 2 of them hated Ianthe. Hunter recalled that Ifis was the adopted grandson of the current saint, who was implied to have suspected Ianthe from the beginning and had helped the kids try to kill her in every storyline. There was a non-zero chance that Ifis believed Hunter was an evil cultist. Hunter told Ifis not to worry about him and that he was not going anywhere. Ifis responded softly with a smile that was just a little too wide, saying the place would be dull without Hunter. It was clear that Ifis wanted to confront Ianthe, but the unfortunate fact was that Hunter was the one in the line of fire. When Hunter began to step away, Ifis asked if he was headed somewhere and offered to walk with him, citing concern that Hunter might stumble again. Hunter opened his mouth to refuse but paused, considering that since Ifis was related to the saint, this could be a good opportunity. According to the game, the saint was the human closest to the Dread Lady, and since Hunter's spider goddess hadn't left any options for contacting her, trying to connect with the saint might be his best chance. He also wanted to share the knowledge of what was likely to happen in the future. Hunter agreed, turned his back to Ifis, and began to walk quickly away. Fishing into his coat pocket, he pulled out little vials and rolled a pill out of each while Ifis jogged to catch up. Hunter popped the pills into his mouth and swallowed them dry before stashing the bottles again. The migraine from earlier had returned, likely signaling a fever, and he felt grateful for the medication Chiron had given him. Without it, he might have had to return to the infirmary. Hunter noticed that Ianthe did not seem to have any intense personal memories related to Ifis. Their interactions had been strictly professional, and while Ifis treated her as he treated Hunter, she must have accepted being hated by her employees as normal. Ifis caught up and shortened his strides to walk beside Hunter, asking what had brought him out there. Hunter replied that he wanted to get a look at the students. Ifis expressed surprise, noting Hunter had never been interested in them before. Hunter explained that people changed. Ifis asked what Hunter thought of the students so far. Hunter hesitated, realizing he had been looking for Al rather than considering the students as individuals. Prompted by Ifis, he studied them again. The students looked like normal kids with colorful hair. Hunter wondered what Al might have looked like at that age but quickly dismissed the thought. Hunter said he thought the students were way too young. Ifis raised his eyebrows in confusion. Hunter felt the guilt he had experienced earlier around Anemone and Chiron return, now attached to the many young faces. Ignoring Ifis, Hunter wondered if Ianthe and Ifis were real, then the game's protagonists must be real too. If the game's plot played out, the students were about to face serious challenges. Hunter considered that taking off after dumping everything on Ifis or the Saint was the safest option for himself and Al. He wasn't sure they would believe him or act on what he told them, but that was their problem. The students might look young, but since they were in their late teens and early 20s, they were technically adults. Still, Hunter felt that technically could go to hell because they didn't feel like adults to him. He remembered being that age, the fear, confusion, and vulnerability that came with being an adult but not quite. He had thought himself fully grown in his 20s but realized later how much of a child he still had been. Frowning, Hunter grappled with his conscience and failed to notice how long the awkward silence with Ifis had stretched out. Ifis prompted him with President. Hunter waved a hand and told him to shut up because he was thinking, then went back to ignoring him. Hunter wondered if Al was one of those students. Whether Al was a student or not, he either remembered his past life or he didn't. Hunter considered the possibility that if Al remembered his past life, he probably remembered the game too, which meant Hunter would have to convince him to abandon these people despite the impending apocalypse. He questioned whether his stubborn, Goody Two-Shoes son would be willing to do that if Al didn't remember. Hunter wondered how he could persuade him to come along. Even if Al didn't know Ianthe personally, her terrible reputation was well known. Hunter had Ianthe's money, which might allow him to bribe Al, but if that failed, what else could he do? Kidnap him? Apologize for abducting him while claiming to be his father from a past life? Hunter felt overwhelmed by the complexity of being in a new body and envied those who simply reincarnated and forgot everything. Ifis, sitting beside him, made a wiping motion at his eyes before continuing to watch Hunter, who had forgotten he was there. Hunter stopped fighting with himself, deciding that once he met Al, he would check if Al remembered. If he did, there was a slim chance he'd be willing to leave. If not, the chances were almost non-existent. Most importantly, Hunter resolved to be careful not to frighten or traumatize the new Al, especially given Ianthe's awful reputation. He concluded that if Al refused to leave, Hunter would have no choice but to stay and try to help the other children. Frustrated, Hunter cursed, prompting Ifis to ask which one. Hunter snapped at Ifis for still being there, and Ifis noted with genuine pity that Hunter had hurt his head. Hunter snapped back that he had a lot on his mind, to which Ifis replied that he had never seen Hunter look so worried before. Hunter gestured toward the students passing by and explained that they were just babies who needed someone to look out for them. He couldn't let children get eaten by giant worms. It was basic human decency. If Al was one of those students, Hunter would want someone to protect him, even if they didn't know Al personally and even if it was dangerous. Hunter reflected that if he hadn't come here, it would have only been a few more years before he sent Al to college. He had never pressured Al to go. Al had chosen it himself, insisting on becoming a doctor and pestering Hunter about it, even selecting schools and subtly asking about financial support. Hunter thought Al was insane for wanting such an expensive and exhausting degree and had tried to explain the harsh realities of the profession, which led to multiple fights. Eventually, they reconciled, and Hunter promised to support Al's education as long as he had the grades. He had secretly looked forward to it with a mix of sadness and pride. Now, that future was gone. Even if Al was here, the previous version of him was dead, just like the rest of their old life. The thought hit Hunter like a hammer. He had failed the child he had raised and loved most. The realization crushed him, twisting his gut and leaving him unable to speak or breathe. Though he had lost people before, this pain was so deep it felt unreal, relentlessly crashing over him. A part of him believed that if he could suffer enough, he might somehow undo what had been done and bring his son back. Hunter's mind began to collapse inward, and he knew this was a bad place to do it, but he couldn't stop. Then he felt a strange sensation, as if someone had knocked on his metaphysical door and thrown something through mail slot. Suddenly, everything emotionally zoomed out. The loss and pain remained but felt distant, like a weight he had learned to carry. At that moment, Hunter stumbled, and Ifis caught him, gripping his arms and turning his back to block the road from others' sight. Ifis watched him carefully, his intensity less hostile now. Hunter realized he was covered in cold sweat and shaking. He straightened up and managed to free himself from Ifis's grip on the first try. Ifis did not ask if Hunter was all right, which which was fortunate because Hunter might have punched him. Instead, Ifus asked if Hunter had understood. Now Hunter replied affirmatively, meaning only that he could stand, not that he had his emotions in order. Confused, Hunter might have broken down again if not for Ifus's distraction. Ifus warned that spells like that wouldn't work long-term and that it was better to process such things naturally over time. Hunter asked what he meant. Ifus gave a patient, level stare, expecting Hunter to figure it out himself. When Hunter did, a shiver passed over him. The earlier zooming out feeling hadn't come from himself but from Ifus. Hunter, surprised by this magic, demanded to know what Ifus had just done. Ifus shrugged, unconcerned, and explained that it was a blessing of perspective. He reminded Hunter that he was a necromancer too, and expressed surprise that Hunter hadn't recognized it. Frustrated by his incomplete understanding of this new world, Hunter insisted that Ifus couldn't just do that without asking. Ifus told Hunter that next time, he should not let it through. He produced a white card from thin air, infused it casually with a golden mana glow, and offered it to Hunter, suggesting they find time to talk alone. Hunter, naturally suspicious, pinched the card from Ifus' hand and held it cautiously before reading it aloud, questioning if it was a joke. Ifus smiled slightly, explaining that not many people understood it but that he was serious about his services, urging Hunter to put his mana in the receiver so he could be contacted later. Hunter pocketed the card and asked Ifus to leave him alone. Ifus bowed shallowly and wished Hunter well, then walked away, making sure Hunter saw him go. Once alone, Hunter moved away from the main road and slumped against a tree. Putting his head in his hands, he pushed back his sweaty bangs, leaned his head against the bark, and closed his eyes. The grief still nestled in his chest, made more tolerable by Ifus' blessing of perspective, though fading already. He tried to stop thinking about it. He was glad Ifus had done it, considering the awkwardness of sobbing in front of arriving students, but he disliked the idea that such things could be manipulated. Seeking distraction, Hunter pulled out the business card again and read, Baron Ifus of House Ephra, Professor of Combat Magic, Aegis University. Ordained Priest of the Lord, Underground, End of Life Assistance. Grief Counseling. Hunter struggled a bit with the Sidonian language, noting its ambiguity in turning verbs into nouns and asserting possession. The phrase end of life assistance could mean help for those naturally nearing the end of life or assistance in hastening death. Suspected it was a necromancer's joke. The last line, grief counseling, made him frown. He wondered how Ifus had known to cast the spell on him, tailored for those dealing with loss. Hunter realized that the more he learned, the less he understood. Having part of Ianthe's memory had seemed advantageous, but now it felt like the bare minimum needed to get by. Many small things were known implicitly by others but only sank in for him when encountered directly. He needed years to adjust, not days. Also, he desperately wanted a hot shower. He stood, grateful that the campus's vegetation made hiding from the road easy, and debated whether to keep searching among the students or to visit Ianthe's apartment instead. As he walked back onto the grass, a flash of color caught his eye near the school gate, where students trickled through on foot and in carriages. A short girl with tan skin and bright bubblegum pink hair drew his attention the moment he looked at her. Certainty struck him like lightning. He couldn't explain why, but he believed he wasn't mistaken. Closer inspection revealed several resemblances: height, skin color, eyes, though now light green instead of hazel, and the shape of her face and scowl felt familiar. His feet carried him toward her faster and faster until he nearly ran, giddiness bubbling inside him, the earlier despair half forgotten. It found his son, then his steps slowed despite the resemblance. There were at least two major differences. First, the child now appeared to be a girl. Second, she looked remarkably like the protagonist of Rabbit Heart. Meanwhile, Euphrosyne stood in Castry, only a few miles from Aegis University, where she had spent the last 7 years preparing to go. Instead of excitement, she struggled not to turn around and leave. A large part of this was fear of dying again if she went to Aegis, but the biggest reason was spite toward Abbess Alk. To understand her grievance with Alk, one had to look back until age 12. Euphrosyne had lived as a normal girl among orphans in the village of Pella. Monastery there, overseen by the gentle Abbot Musos and his kindly monks, had raised her and the other children in a caring, if eccentric, environment. As a child, she had found it boring and dreamed of grand adventures and heroic destinies like those in her books. When she turned 12 and began suffering fevers that gave her visions of another world, she was frightened but excited. In Sidonia, it was known that gods sometimes rewarded favored mortals with memories of previous lives, often leading to fame or success. Despite the painful merging of her current mind with her old one, Euphrosyne assumed it would be worth it. Knowledge from another life offered many practical advantages. Greater perspective and maturity at a young age provided opportunities to get ahead and form early connections, and it was possible to profit by selling inventions or knowledge from a previous world yet undiscovered in Sidonia. As Euphrosyne's past and present merged, the idea of a successful, comfortable future became more appealing than one filled with excitement or adventure. However, gods never gave gifts without strings attached. Someone divine almost certainly expected something from her, though she had no idea what. At least she did not have to worry about becoming a saint, since one already existed. Saints bore the burden of saving the country from calamities, a responsibility Yuffie found unimaginably stressful. Compared to that, whatever the god wanted from her seemed manageable. When the last of her memories arrived, and she finally recalled playing Rabbit Heart and the post-mortem deal with the goddess, Euphrosyne's reaction to discovering her own sainthood was shock and disbelief. She wondered if fate had cruelly tricked her. She rejected adventure and excitement, preferring the quiet life at Pella Monastery, where her biggest concerns were mundane tasks like gathering goats or weeding. Yet now, after a few fevers, she found herself responsible for the fate of an entire country. She questioned why she had made that wish and whether it was too late to undo it. Unfortunately, it was too late. Euphrosyne's poor skill at deception made her attempts to pretend her fevers were normal easily seen through. Even if she had succeeded, the dramatic arrival of her divine blessing, announced by the deafening tolling of invisible bells and a bolt of lightning that blasted a crater in the monastery courtyard, would have been impossible to hide. Investigators from the temple quickly extracted the truth from her and realized with horror that her arrival meant a new calamity was imminent, far earlier than expected. Worse, the goddess required 2 saints to confront it. The country had survived 5 calamities before, but barely, so the prospect of a 6th, potentially worse than all others, was alarming. Her investigation confirmed Euphrosyne's sainthood and simultaneously concluded they were all about to face grave danger. This news sent many powerful figures into a panic. In the ensuing chaos, Yuffie's comfort and happiness became low priorities. The consensus was that she needed to be hidden, trained, and raised until adulthood so she could face the 6th calamity. The first order of business was to relocate her. Despite her wishes to remain in Pella among familiar people, authorities deemed it insecure. More importantly, Abbot Musos, though a holy mage, was not a divine. Holy mage temple policy mandated that saints be mentored by teachers with the same divine blessing, and no exceptions would be made given the stakes. At that time, only 3 candidates could serve as Yuffie's new guardian. Saint Calliope qualified, but was ruled out to avoid risking both saints in one place. Divine High Priestess Hippolyta, known for her battle prowess and lively personality, was the second candidate. Yuffie chose her immediately, and Hippolyta gladly accepted. Unfortunately, she died in an ambush by the order less than a week later. That left only the third candidate, Divine High Priestess Alk, who preferred the title Abbess Alk and was notorious for her cold reputation. Euphrosyne would eventually call her the worst fucking mentor of all time. Abbess Alk lived in Kos, a remote mountain village so isolated most Sidonians considered it a myth. Temple leaders deemed this perfect, believing that even if Yuffie's identity as the young saint leaked, the order would struggle to reach her there. This also meant Yuffie, mourning the people she had lost in her last life, faced the harsh reality that she might not see or hear from anyone in Pella until her training concluded. Thus, her peaceful life as a regular girl in Pella ended, replaced by a high-pressure existence as the young saint in Kos. Despite everything, Euphrosyne remained an optimist, trying to find silver linings in her new situation. Though Abbess Alk was not known for friendliness, Yuffie resolved to give her a fair chance. She had read many stories where the hero's mentor initially seemed mean or intimidating, but later revealed caring and helpful qualities beneath the surface. With Abbess Alk, there was no such hidden kindness. She was neither caring nor helpful. Abbess Alk believed only in self-reliance and expected others to pull themselves up by their own metaphorical bootstraps. At first, Yuffie did not grasp the full severity of Alk's convictions when they first met, and Alk told her that being the young saint would not earn special treatment and that she had to rely on herself. Yuffie eagerly agreed. She wanted to be treated like everyone else, normal despite her status. What Yuffie had not understood was that wanting normalcy did not change the uniqueness of her situation. At Kos Monastery, everyone, children and adults alike, was expected to do chores, pray, and study, but because Yuffie would one day have to fight the cult of an undead god, she also endured rigorous physical and magical combat training. Creating a packed schedule, she accepted this, knowing the skills might save her life. However, training alone was not enough. Yuffie had to gain admission to Aegis University to fulfill her divine mission, requiring her to learn subjects not taught. At Kos, this added extra hours of independent study. Furthermore, the monastery library lacked resources for all her subjects, so she needed to acquire new books. When Yuffie asked Abbess Alk for help obtaining these books, the request was denied. Abbess Alk told Yuffie that it was neither her job nor the temple's to solve Yuffie's problems, and warned that if Yuffie expected everything to be handed to her just because she was a saint, she might as well give up and let Calliope do the mission. Yuffie was stunned and questioned whether Alk thought her extra study was a personal hobby rather than service to the temple. Alk insisted that if Yuffie wanted books, she should buy them herself. If she needed money, she should work for it, suggesting that the healers could use an extra hand. Yuffie protested that her schedule left no spare hours for work, but Alk dismissed her complaints and ended the conversation. Yuffie learned that most discussions with Alk ended that way. Yuffie discovered that shipping textbooks to remote mountain towns cost far more than the books themselves, and as a foundling, she had no inheritance to fund. For studies, the temple paid her very little, and local odd jobs were scarce and poorly paid without family backing. She couldn't obtain loans, and Alk refused to help. Consequently, Yuffie worked extensively in addition to her chores, lessons, training, and independent study. Attempts to leave Kos were thwarted by Alk, who would track her down and force her back. Letters sent to the temple or Abbot Musos were intercepted and destroyed by Alk. When Yuffie confided in others, they dismissed her concerns, saying she would appreciate it when she was older, provoking Yuffie's anger. Torts regarding tuition for Aegis University, Yuffie hoped for financial support, but Alk declared that education was Yuffie's responsibility and refused to pay, reasoning she would not fund other monks' attendance at such an expensive institution. Yuffie, frustrated by years of Alk's obstinance, retorted angrily but was removed from Alk's office by other monks. Despite becoming a paranoid, under-socialized, money-obsessed workaholic, Yuffie succeeded in obtaining the necessary books, achieved the highest scores on the entrance exams, earned a scholarship, and prepared to leave Kos. At the last moment, Yuffie learned that the scholarship funds had been registered under the wrong name due to a clerical error, preventing her from accessing them at Kos's bank. The university's bank froze the funds and filed a report with the judiciary, suspecting potential fraud. Without money for a lawyer, Yuffie had to travel to Castry, the university's bank location, to correct the error. In person, Castry lay across the continent, the very city she needed money to reach. Yuffie reflected bitterly on her situation, recalling her father's past life words about fighting God if given the chance, and resolved that, if she ever confronted the goddess again, she would give her a piece of her mind and her fists. When Yuffie informed Alk of the scholarship issue, she did not ask for help, knowing it would be futile. Alk responded with laughter, which Yuffie matched before retreating to her cell to cry. When it was time to leave Kos for Castry, Yuffie said goodbye to everyone except Alk, grateful that traveling across the continent meant she would not have to see the abbess's face again. She relied solely on herself, as she had no one else to depend on. 2 weeks and over 1,000 miles later, Yuffie disembarked from the ferry at Castry, her stomach empty and her head light from lack of food. The capital city had consumed almost all her earnings, and the ferry ticket had used the rest. Despite this, Yuffie felt too happy to be bothered. She only needed to resolve the scholarship issue at the university's bank before leaving behind 7 years of hardship and enjoying a large breakfast. The bank, Yuffie examined the paperwork that had caused her so much trouble. She found it strange that an issue had arisen since she had personally filled out the form, triple-checked it, and her handwriting was neat and legible. She wondered what could have caused the problem at the bank. Yuffie discovered that someone had used ink identical to hers to alter a few letters on the paperwork, making key spellings illegible. The tampering had occurred after she had sealed the envelope herself because the mana seal was broken and the envelope was crudely resealed with cheap glue, showing no effort to conceal the interference. She immediately knew who was responsible. During her entire time in Kos, only one person had ever tampered with her mail, and only one person was irrational enough to force a teenager to hike alone across a continent. After resolving the issue with the bank and apologizing for the confusion, Yuffie stepped back into the street surrounded by the tall marble buildings of Castry's business district. She gazed down the wide road toward the turquoise sea beyond and questioned whether she should just quit. She had never before considered rejecting the goddess mission, as lives depended on her, and as someone who had aspired to be a doctor in her previous life and had become a healer in this one she deeply cared about. Saving people, however, everyone had limits, and leaving Cydonia to its fate was an option no god or mortal could force her to abandon. If Alk believed Yuffie was too irresponsible to be the saint, then Alk could take her place and explain to Saint Calliope and the other temple leaders why the young saint had quit on the eve of the newest apocalypse. Yuffie suspected Alk would paint her as a coward, but she no longer cared. Though Yuffie had money to eat, she lacked any hunger. Instead, a cold, sinking weight filled her gut, accompanied by a strange sensation of lightness, as if she had been pulled down so hard that her soul was drifting away from her body. Beneath that numbness, she recognized pure, unbridled fury in both this life and the previous. Yuffie had struggled to handle her anger, often confusing unfamiliar emotions with rage. She had improved greatly through therapy and learned techniques to control most of her anger, but none of it helped now. She wanted to destroy something, hurt someone, but above all, she she wanted to kill Alk though she did not normally desire to kill. Revenge seemed justified. No amount of explanations about manipulation and mistreatment for her own good could erase the horror that the madwoman she had left behind could still reach into her life from 1,000 miles away. Killing Alk felt less like murder and more like self-defense. Even if the temple arrested her, they would still have to face the sixth calamity alone. Yuffie would cheer for them from prison and write a memoir about the ordeal caused by those incompetent people who had handed her over to a monster. She would have to admit that the goddess who chose her had also chosen that monster. If the goddess was good, why had she done that? Was Alk not as bad as Yuffie felt? And were her feelings just exaggerated? Everyone said it was for her own good, so did that mean she deserved this treatment? Was she being ungrateful for feeling upset more than anything? Yuffie wished for someone to talk to. College was not supposed to be like this. In her old life, she had planned it all out. She and Joseph would attend the same school, facing the stress of semi-adulthood together. Her father and Auntie Maria would have driven them to a university, and even after dropping them off, their help would have been just a phone call away. It felt unfair that all those people were gone now, absent since her birth into this world, a fact she had only learned after enduring those fevers. Sometimes she thought it would be better not to remember if she did not know that somewhere else she would have had unconditional support and love. Would missing it hurt as much? Despite her anger, Yuffie did not leave over the hours it took to walk out of Castry and up the mountain to Aegis. Her fury gave way to fatigue. She regretted not forcing herself to eat earlier, as her stomach clenched painfully and her focus scattered. Users of lunar magic needed more calories and frequent meals, so missing breakfast and then undertaking strenuous mountain walking affected her more than most. The road was flanked by thick forest on either side, with occasional solemn metal pylons supporting near, invisible wards. Pausing, Yuffie licked her lips and considered leaving the road to find food. Hunting or gathering on unwarded land was allowed, so no one would stop her if she slipped through to search for breakfast. However, unwarded land was unpredictable. She might encounter monsters, mana scars, or spatial distortions. Though confident in handling most dangers, doing so on an empty stomach seemed riskier than finishing her walk. She looked down at herself with a frown. Her tan skin had darkened further after weeks of travel and glistened with sweat. Every inch of her, from worn brown boots to faded yellow robes, was covered in travel dust. Did she really want to add blood to the mix? Her lunar blessing enhanced her strength but made her terrible at cleaning cantrips. Using one now risked accidentally disintegrating her clothes again, which would be embarrassing unless she was deep in the woods and unseen. She owned only 3 outfits. Could she justify buying new clothes just because she had been too impatient to wait for a bath? She wondered why the Celestial 8-in-1 had imposed such an inconvenient restriction. Though too angry at the Dread Lady to pray to her, Yuffie still felt connected to the 8. Despite their strange blessing conditions, she complained to them she wished only to eat and bathe and cursed the location of the school atop a mountain. She pleaded with the 8 for pity, threatening to go to their altar and cry if they did not help. She gave a pitiful sniffle, then resolved to endure. Once on campus, she could find food, her room, and soak in a bath for hours, but first, she had to check in with her new guardian. For a moment, all the feelings about Alk that had faded from fatigue returned. This time, her attempt to convert anger went better. Her new guardian was from Rabbit Heart, so she already knew a lot about him in the game. He had been sweet and helpful, nothing like Alk. Even if they didn't get along, she could ignore his personality and admire his pretty face. By the time she reached Aegis Gates, her long pink hair clung to her skin inconveniently, and hunger made her consider chewing her bag's leather strap. Despite her poor condition, she felt better now that she thought of the game. Going to Aegis wasn't just for the goddess. It was to meet her chosen heroes too. Knowing so much about people she'd never met felt strange, but it also made her feel as if friends were waiting for her. She kept that thought to herself, feeling it was creepy. More importantly, she reminded herself she wasn't the only one struggling. Their lives sucked too, and she was determined to help them. The temple and the goddess might have botched her life, but she wouldn't let their incompetence ruin her new friends' lives. Good endings only for everybody. She just had to figure out how to politely explain to a bunch of pseudo-strangers that she knew some of their possible futures and darkest secrets without freaking them out. She decided to stop thinking about that problem because it made her anxious. None of the game's meet cuties with the heroes were supposed to happen for a few days, so she had time to settle in. After everything she'd been through, a few days of relaxing wasn't too much to ask. As she came through the gate, a person walked swiftly toward her. She tried to ignore them, hoping stress and hunger weren't making her hallucinate, but it didn't work. No, this couldn't be. The woman approaching was unmistakable: long blood, red hair, an eye patch, and a cold face that had haunted Yuffie's nightmares since she'd remembered Rabbit Heart. Her new nemesis looked like she was about to tackle her. Shocked, Yuffie flinched and stepped back, but Ianthe grabbed her arm instead. All those years of combat training were useless. Yuffie froze like a deer in headlights and couldn't move. This wasn't in the game. Confronted by the Villainess before entering the school, things couldn't couldn't get worse, Alphonse? President Ianthe asked, her uncovered eye staring intensely into Yuffie's soul. Do you recognize me? It could get worse, her mistake, her mind churned. New title for her memoir, I Was Dead, named by the Villainess. Ianthe tightened her grip and pulled Yuffie closer, demanding, do you know who I am? Yuffie thought several useless things quickly. Shouldn't Ianthe be taller? Ianthe wore flats. Secondly, Ianthe looked beaten in the game. She appeared impeccably elegant, but this Ianthe wore no makeup, had waxy skin, wrinkled clothes, messy hair poorly braided, and bitten fingernails. Her eye burned with feverish desperation, or perhaps an actual fever. Yuffie's healer instincts suggested Ianthe was sick. Thirdly, despite destined enmity, something about Ianthe felt off, a dissonance between expectation and reality. This was the woman who planned to kill her, all the good guys from Rabbit Heart, and countless innocent Sidonians caught in the crossfire. Why did realizing Ianthe was sick make Yuffie feel a little concerned? She snapped out of it. Who cared if the Villainess was sick? That wasn't Yuffie's problem. More importantly, how did Ianthe know her dead name? She hadn't told the temple investigators, never written it in her diary, and it wasn't a Sidonian name. That probably meant Ianthe knew she was a saint. Why else approach her? It also meant Ianthe might know about Rabbit Heart, which meant she and the rest of the country were in serious trouble. Of course I recognize you, Yuffie said, trying a polite smile, but her twitching lips formed a tortured smirk instead. You must be Aegis' famous president. To what do I owe the honor? You. Ianthe trailed off, frowning in anger. Perhaps realizing she was accosting a random student in full view, she let go of Yuffie and stepped back. I just wanted to talk to you about something. If you could come to my office. No, Yuffie wasn't going to a second location with Ianthe. I'm sorry, I think you have me confused for somebody else, and I really need to get going. Wait, just give me a few minutes to explain, Ianthe said, but Yuffie was already moving, dodging around her. Sorry, I'm late for something. I hope you find who you're looking for. Bye. She made it obvious she wanted to get away and quickly turned her fast walk into a run because, holy fuck, shit, damn, what the hell. She headed for a crowd and tried to disappear, then turned a corner and slipped into the first door she saw. Unsure of the building, she slowed to a frantic fast walk, her hands gripping her bag straps tightly enough to threaten breaking them. How did Ianthe know her dead name from her last world? She hadn't told the temple investigators, never wrote it in her diary, and it wasn't a Sidonian name. That probably meant Ianthe knew she was a saint. Why else approach her? It also meant Ianthe might know about Rabbit Heart, which meant she and the rest of the country were totally screwed. Euphrosyne had never intended to forgive Alk for her deception, but she realized she had been so focused on surviving the attention of one unstable woman that she had overlooked the danger posed by another. In every ending of the game, Ianthe attempted to sacrifice Euphrosyne to summon a world-ending titan, a scenario that threatened not only her life but the lives of everyone in the country if she failed to avoid it. Now that she was here, millions of lives depended on every choice she made, and she felt she was already failing. Earlier that day, Euphrosyne had believed Alk was her breaking point. She was wrong. This situation was her limit. She emerged from one building and headed toward another, quickly scanning her surroundings to confirm Ianthe was not following, though she refused to slow down. She needed to find her dorm quickly, lock the door, and hide until she could decide what to do. She noticed with alarm that she was not feeling well. Her breathing was too fast and shallow, causing dizziness from lack of oxygen. Despite knowing she needed to calm down, the presence of too many people only heightened her anxiety ahead. The dormitory shone like a lighthouse in a storm. She charged inside, dodging people as black spots swarmed her vision. As a healer, Euphrosyne had more control over her body than most and attempted to use magic to calm herself, regulating her breathing somewhat. Still, the combination of low blood sugar and an overwhelmed amygdala left her vulnerable. She found her room quickly, certain it was correct because she had been so anxious about entering the wrong one on her first day. She had memorized the number. She grabbed the handle, pulled the door open loudly, and stepped into the empty room. She was alone now. She could let herself panic. She dropped her bag and paused, surprised to feel herself falling backward into darkness without moving. Her body caught up to her mind and collapsed to the floor without permission. She thought to herself that she would never skip breakfast again.